Welcome to Kent Hance, the best storyteller in Texas podcast. Chancellor Hance gets us started with the saying of the day. What do you have for us?
Saying of the day is a good one. Perfection is not attainable, but excellence can be caught along the way.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we need to go for that excellence while we're seeking perfection.
That's right. I like that. You can learn a lot from that.
Yep.
Want to encourage everyone to, if you didn't listen last week, to listen to the episode with Sam Middleton and be ready for the part 2 of that interview to come out on Wednesday of this week.
Yeah, Sam did a great job. Swapping Dirt is the title of his book. You can get it through the Ranching Heritage Center at Texas Tech. You can call the Ranching Heritage Center or go online and order a book. And they're really neat. They have a lot of chapters. In every little chapter, I just put it beside my bed, and I'd read 2 or 3 chapters, sometimes 4 or 5 a night, and make me forget other things and think about him trying to sell a $41 million ranch to a guy that showed up in Abilene in a bus. You know,
Young Jeremy.
Yeah, and they said, the guy picked him up and said, Sam, he's not going to buy a ranch. He came into town on a bus. You know, most guys are going to buy a $41 million ranch. They'll fly in their own jet. Right. But he was riding a bus.
That story alone is worth going back and listening to last week.
It's great. I saw a lot of people at the basketball game this weekend, and it said that they'd listened to the Sam Middleton, and they really enjoyed it.
I'm curious, when you go to a Texas Tech basketball game, I've a lot of people want to say hi, get a picture with you, shake your hand. Do you get to watch the game at all?
Yeah, yeah. If you want to, but especially young people, they don't know who in the hell you are and don't care. And I'm, when I was chancellor at Texas Tech, I always had a couple of saddle tramp organization spirit guys that sit, that stand by where I was to make sure that you got to watch the game.
Oh, that's good.
I had a guy one time want to talk to me about a pig farm in Perryton, and I wanted to watch the game. So you had to figure out a way. Call me next week and we'll talk about it.
Right. So they kept a little buffer around you. That's good. That's good.
But I think that Sam does a good job, and that you'd really enjoy that book, and it's a good gift to people. It's a coffee table book, and it's large, and I think you'd really enjoy it.
It's a beautiful book.
Yeah.
I mean, books can be beautiful. It's
got a lot of pictures in it, and a lot of great stories about the 4 Sixes Ranch, the Boone Pickens Ranch, the Wagner Ranch, a bunch of history in that entire book. Today I was going to talk a little about Alcatraz, and Alcatraz is something that, people that go in the Sweet 16 on the day off, you might go out to Alcatraz. And when I went through the tour before, the National Park Service runs it, and you can see San Francisco, and it doesn't look that far away. Mm-hmm. But no one reportedly ever escaped. There was a group that they made a face out of some soap and some hair from the barbershop. It looked like these guys were in bed, and they escaped, and they had a raft, but they never were caught. And a few people thought they got away, and I think most of the people feel like they probably drowned.
Yeah,
didn't make it. They'd eventually been caught if they had gotten away. And but you're there on the rock, and you're looking across to San Francisco, beautiful city, and you can't get there, Alcatraz was named by a Spanish explorer the island of pelicans, and they had pelicans all over the place, and so that's how it got its name. And then they had the very first lighthouse on the West Coast was there. And it was used as a military prison during the Civil War, and then was a military training grounds. And in 1933, it was transferred over to the Department of Justice, and they made it a prison. and stayed open until 1962. In 62, they closed it down because the operating costs were 3 times higher than any other prison. And they had to, get a boat to take supplies out there every day. And, I mean, it's just, it was very difficult to run and maintain. And in the 60s, about that time, people were talking about rehab, trying to rehabilitate the prisoners, and that they didn't think that, Alcatraz was in the rehabilitating business.
They were in the punishing business.
They were in the punishing business, and you could see freedom, but you couldn't get it.
I always thought it was interesting that the families of the people that worked at Alcatraz, they lived right there on the island, right next to the prison. And they just didn't think it was any big deal. That's just where they lived. And then they'd take a boat and go across to school in San Francisco.
Yeah.
It's a great tour, as you mentioned. If you're going out to the Sweet 16 in San Francisco, it's worth taking a day, a part of your day, and going.
You can see from the facilities that are still there that the salt water it was hard to have a good upkeep.
Mm-hmm.
And but they had people like Al Capone, and Al Capone called it Al Capone Island. Mm-hmm. Al Capone, not Alcatraz, and that he was there for a while. Then he died of syphilis, and he did not do well. Machine Gun Kelly was there. Machine Gun Kelly, Babyface Nelson, one of those guys asked him why he robbed banks. He said, that's where the money is. Ask a stupid question. Why do you rob banks? That's where the money is. Oh, okay, just thought we'd ask or we're passing along. And they had a guy named Alvin Creepy Crawlis. And he was there from it was like 1936 to 1962. He's there a long time. And he was there for all kinds of things. But the thing that got him sent there was a kidnapping of William Helm, who had invented and was marketing Helm's beer. And they used to have those little Helm's beer signs and back in the 60s, and had jingles, Helm's beer.
I remember it.
Have a drink and have a glass and see. Helm's beer is the only beer for me.
That's right. I'm trying to remember that jingle now.
and they he kidnapped him and got life on that one. And he'd been involved in manslaughter and murder. And he said the reason he survived that long, he just kept a low profile.
Oh, and survived in the prison?
Yeah. Why would you have a high profile? I can't understand why I would even think about that. But the military prison was for people that had really messed up in the military and got sentenced to prison. And then it was an army barracks for a while, a training ground for soldiers. And then the next thing, it became prison. And probably the most notorious prison in the world, that the most spoken about, and whose name people understand immediately when they talk about Alcatraz.
Talk about making it difficult to escape.
Yeah, but you can see where you want to go, and it's just right over there.
Mm-hmm.
And many of them, some of them jumped in the water. They got out of the prison. They jumped in the water to swim. And they swam right back. They didn't stay long.
Cold water.
Really cold. Mm-hmm. And the currents are strong, and just you're not going to make it. Oh, Robert Stroud, the Birdman of Alcatraz, he was always trying to figure out how man could fly and how he could be like a bird. And he was famous for those studies. I don't know why he's famous. He never came up with an answer. And he did a lot of that study at Leavenworth in Kansas before he got sent to Alcatraz. They thought he was a risk of getting away. They was afraid that he was going to fly away or something. And so they didn't want him flying away from Leavenworth, and they sent him to Alcatraz.
Yeah.
And he worked on birds and birds fly. And by hours, he'd sit out and watch birds and try to come up with some way he could be like a bird and fly.
What was the
out.
crime he committed? Do you know? I don't know what it was.
I think he was in on manslaughter.
Okay.
He, they always said the worst of the worst they sent there. And it wasn't a huge prison, but they just couldn't get out.
Mm-hmm.
And the cost in changing to rehab, trying to have rehab in prisons, and the cost is what eventually shut it down.
I bet the guys were glad it was shut down. They go somewhere else.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
That's a rough place.
At one point in time, they had a lot of private prisons all over the state here in Texas. And there was one in Dickens, Texas, up by Lubbock. And Hawaii had run out of room for prisons. And they got a 747 and loaded it full of people and flew them from Hawaii to Lubbock.
Really?
And it was in February. And those prisoners got off that plane in February in Lubbock, Texas, and were bussed over to Dickens. And they had a lot of stories and let them write back home and everything. And the word was, you're going to Dickens if you cause any problems. And from the word they got back from the prisoners that had gone to Dickens, they didn't want to go to Dickens. And that wasn't on their Chamber of Commerce deal. And it did not make for pleasant conversation.
Did the state make money on that deal? Do they pay them to
the
house them?
private prison.
Okay.
It was a private prison.
I'm sorry, you said
and
that.
they made some money. Some of them, the private prisons, didn't make it, and so they had to look for other things. In Post, Texas, they're looking at. They had a private prison. They're looking at leasing it to the feds on people that have committed crimes that are here illegally, and that are going to be locked up before they're sent back.
I don't know the finances of it all, but it seems like El Salvador shipping those people back to El Salvador for $6 million or something. That seems like a pretty good deal.
It's cheap.
Yeah.
I looked at that $6 million, and El Salvador took a little different approach. They all had long hair and everything. They shaved everybody's head, the day they came in. And I'll bet you your rights are not real good in El Salvador.
Have you seen how they march them into the prison, handcuffed with their head shoved down and bent over at the waist? I don't feel any bit sorry for them, But $6 million sounded pretty cheap to have them
real cheap
house them. Yeah,
put them all there. You close your prisons and sublet. Talking about subleasing something. I always felt like the Vietnam War. If we'd sublet that to the Israelis, it'd have been over in 2 weeks.
Yeah,
they'd have pounded them.
Yeah, it's like that old story you told once. If someone punched you in the gut, he'd blacken both of your eyes or something like that. It was a funny story.
That was the one where I said that this guy I knew in Dimmitt, if you thumped his ear, then he'd try to knock all your teeth out and call it even. And said, no, I just thumped your ear, and he'd try to beat you to a pulp, and so we're even now.
Well, sometimes that's the way you got to approach things.
Yeah, some people will understand it that way. But the cost, 3 times it caught up with them, so they closed it. Another issue that's come up lately is the abolishment of the Department of Education.
I saw some of your friends at the press conference.
Yeah,
that the president had. I saw Governor Abbott was there.
Right.
Lieutenant Governor Patrick was there. I thought that was cool.
He had a lot of state officials that were there, and they'd like to have the money. They're going to take less than probably half the money and give it to the states and let them spend it on education. The bill that passed in 1979, my first year in Congress. I voted against it. And then when Reagan got elected, I introduced a bill to abolish the Department of Education.
What didn't you like about it?
It was a bureaucracy. They spent more time on shuffling papers than into educating anyone. And if you'd spent that same amount of money on the children and on teachers and on doing what the state and local issue is education. And you're close to the people there and that are voting for the local school board, and they have more input. And the federal bureaucracy spends a lot of money to get very little investment actually to the people. So if you're going to give a big part of that money to the states and local, let them make the decision.
It reminds me of the time you said once, and I've always remembered this. You said the closer you are to power, the more influence you can have, or more say you can have on how things get done. And it seems to make sense with all that money being shifted to state and local. Well, heck, the local people can talk to the school board.
Yeah, they can say what they need to do, and they can say that, just on special ed or things like that, local school district knows what they need, and they can utilize that.
Our teachers are so important.
They are, and they need support. There's a difference in the teachers and the teachers union. I had several aunts that were teachers, and one of my aunts, Mrs. Green in Lamesa, she didn't think if a kid couldn't read well and couldn't do math, and they were in the third grade, she wouldn't advance them to the fourth grade. She wanted to make sure they were prepared. She spent a lot of hours, a lot of time with them. She was dedicated and did a great job. One of many of the hundreds of thousands and millions of teachers that we have.
There was one girl last week that is suing the high school that she graduated from. She graduated with honors. She's 19 years old, and she can't read.
Yeah.
They just passed her through the system with honors, graduated.
Well, that proves she was polite. Didn't learn anything and can't get a job, but that she was polite, so they graduated her. You have trouble. Sometimes you'll have an athlete get into college, and they've been passed because they were a pretty good athlete, and that's always a very sad situation.
There was a famous story in the early 80s about Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska. Kevin Ross was a basketball player there, was there for 4 years, and when he got done, he couldn't read, and he ended up going back to school and sitting down with third graders, for the photo op of it all. But yeah, it's a shame. It's a definite shame.
You want to, when students get out, you want them to be well prepared, that they can do something and do it well. And if I'm looking at hiring people, and I'm CEO of a Fortune 500 company, I'm probably not going to go to Columbia. Those students are so interested in world affairs that I want them to work for me and be there early and stay late and do a good job. But they want to save the world and demonstrate and take over an administration building. So I wouldn't have time for those students.
So if a resume came across your desk at Columbia University?
I wouldn't do it right now.
Yeah.
It's just, I think it's a
bunch of kids that don't know how good they got it.
Yeah. They demonstrate and they have to sit in and build. And I hate to tell them this, but nobody cares what they think. The news will show pictures. And sometimes they'll show pictures. There'll be 30 or 40 people there. And they had to work hard to get 30 or 40 people there.
Yeah.
And it's just, you got a right to vote, and that's going to be a determining factor on what happens, but not some demonstration or somebody camped out in a tent on the campus or in one of the, administration offices.
One of the things that also grabbed headlines this week was the Tesla vandalism, the Molotov cocktails, the firebombing. It's crazy.
It is crazy, and anyone that gets caught doing that should get a severe punishment.
Sounds like they're gonna.
Let them go to Alcatraz and see how they like it. Maybe they'll catch on that. I don't understand, and the Democrats hadn't really been hard on that, and they should be. When the demonstrators were in Washington on January 6th back in 2021, they were pretty tough on that. But I hadn't seen anybody issue any statements on the.
Oh, they're encouraging them.
Yeah.
Jasmine Crockett's out there. That's how she wants to celebrate her birthday, with more people trying to take down Tesla. And then Tim Walz, did you hear the speech that he gave about, he said, the app on your phone where you can check stock? He said, I added Tesla to it, and I'm happy to report that it's down, it's 225 and dropping. Well, the problem with that is they have a large investment in their state's pension fund is invested in Tesla. So he didn't think that all the way through.
He doesn't. He was trying to show that he was one of the guys and go hunting, and he didn't know how to load the gun. They got that on TV, and he was trying to figure out how to load the gun. And Tim, that won't
Why is
work.
he out in the news right now? What's he doing?
He's trying to get publicity so he can run for president.
Okay.
Everybody's doing that and think they'll be great, but I would advise them to be quiet until things get real bad and then come up with a solution. But and they've not played it smart because they've jumped on the Republicans on issues that are 80-20 or 90-10 type issues. The transgender issue, and that's not a winning issue. Just not.
Is Chuck Schumer in trouble?
I don't think so. He can raise a lot of money. I think what he was doing was he was trying to help the Democrats not get blamed for government shutting down. It had come a time that it was going to be their blame, that they were the ones that could be blamed, and I think he didn't want to mess with that. But others said, well, he should have held out until they gave in on something. Trump's not a big giving in type guy, and he's pretty stout with his position on what he's trying to do. He's had a lot of people get appointed, but they've still got about 4,000 people that they're going to appoint to other positions. Like you'll have the regional manager for the GSA or HUD or something like that for each region, and they haven't appointed them in Texas yet. There's so much to be done. If you get them done, if you get all the appointments done in the first 2 years, you're usually moving pretty fast.
Well, the way this administration's moving, they'll get it done.
Yeah, no, they've been moving fast. Everything they've done, and it's created some controversy. And some of the judges, I know Judge Roberts of the Supreme Court was critical of the president for being critical of the judge that said he couldn't move the illegal aliens. And so are we going to have a Supreme Court justice? Is he going to figure out what can be said by a president, what can't be? I don't think so. And it's freedom of speech. He can say what he wants to. And if somebody thinks it's, wrong or something, then they can say what they want to. But the Supreme Court can't shut down the president of the United States from talking. That's just ridiculous. And that I felt like that he was out of line when he said that.
Judge Roberts was.
Yeah, Judge Roberts was saying, well, he shouldn't say that he can't do that, or he can't. Well, then rule that way if you want to rule that way. But don't come out and say, he can't say that. He could. What are you going to be, the censor or the president?
And justices traditionally stay out of politics.
Stay out of it.
Yeah, no need to say anything.
There's a few that get involved and say all kinds of things, but they shouldn't do that.
Right.
Just you're the judiciary branch, and sit back and read the cases and rule on it. It's kind of like Trump was mad at LeBron and said, just shut up and dribble. I'll tell the judges, shut up and write. Write it in your opinion. But to have a Chief Justice trying to say, well, you can say this or you can say that. And, if you're going to say something, Chief Justice, say it in the court. Say it in the court case. One other thing I wanted to mention, Sandy, is that I was reading an article about a guy in Wisconsin named Don Gorski. And Don Gorski, they had a big ceremony. He ate his 35,000th Big Mac. 35,000.
Wow.
And he started, he's been doing it for 53 years. He's 71 now, and that he got started back in 1972. and he liked those Big Macs, and he ate one his first time and went back and ate two more, ordered two more, and he's been. I mean, this guy is not what you'd call a health nut. Maybe a nut, but it's not a health nut. But 35,000, just keeping count, is a difficult thing.
Isn't it funny the things people will glom onto, like that's become his thing?
Oh, yeah.
Like Lou Gehrig went to work every day and had the consecutive game streak. This guy's eating Big Macs.
I guess they see him get out of his car. 3 Big Macs, please, or 5 or whatever it was. And he's in the Guinness Book of World Records, and I understand that. But I don't know I'd want to be in on that reason.
No, not like you said, not a real health nut.
It said in 99, after in 99, it had 15,000 Big Macs. And he got a record on that. Now he's at 35,000 Big Macs.
Wow. He should have bought a McDonald's.
Should have. He's already spent enough time and money that he should own several of them.
Mm-hmm.
But for people that bought McDonald's franchise back in the 60s and 70s, they've done extremely well.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like the Chick-fil-A people.
Oh.
Made a lot of money.
You want to hear an interesting thing about Chick-fil-A? The percentage of applications that they get for a franchise, it's tougher to get a franchise of Chick-fil-A than it is to get into Harvard. That's how selective they are of who gets a Chick-fil-A franchise.
Well, you get into Harvard, you may not get rich someday. You get a Chick-fil-A franchise, you're going to get rich someday.
You're right.
If you'll do what they say, you're going to make a lot of money.
There's a lot of parents that want their kids to work at Chick-fil-A for the training, the customer service, and the way to do things.
Yeah.
There's a certain Chick-fil-A way, and they teach you that, and they're all good ways. You ever notice that when you leave Chick-fil-A, they always say, "It's my pleasure." They always say that. Yeah.
They've been trained, and they've got a good training program.
Mm-hmm.
And you get in line, and they're standing out there, even if it's raining, taking down your order.
And that line moves.
It moves. They have two, and they merge, after they get their order.
I always thought that Chick-fil-A should have been in charge of getting the COVID vaccine out.
Yeah, they'd have gotten it out. They'd been running people through there real fast, real fast. Saying of the day is perfection is not attainable, but you'll catch excellence along the way. Have a good day, and if you get a chance to be in San Francisco, go look at Alcatraz.